Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why, in the most painful seasons of your life, no one shows up? Why the phone stays silent? Why the crowd disappears? Why heaven itself feels like it's gone quiet? It's not because you're abandoned. It's not because you're forgotten. It's because you're becoming. You see, when the divine wants to transform a soul, he calls it away from everything that distracts it. This is not rejection, it's redirection, it's not exile, it's elevation in disguise. If you're in a season of silence, if you're walking through a valley with no hand to hold, don't you dare think it's the end. This is the womb of your next chapter, and that's exactly what we're diving into today. Why the gods, yes, the divine themselves will want you to be alone. Stay with me till the end, because the reason you're watching this may just be because this is the message meant for your becoming. When heaven marks someone for greatness, the first step is not blessing. It's breaking through isolation, because in a crowd we perform, but in silence we hear. Only in stillness do we start recognizing the voice that's always been there, the one that says, "You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to stand apart." Every prophet, every pioneer, every person who ever carried something eternal was first led away. Into wilderness, into caves, into solitude. Why? Because before you can speak for the world, you need to hear beyond it. Because intimacy with the divine requires distance from the noise. Because sometimes the greatest miracles aren't done in stadiums, they're done in secret. Aloneness isn't punishment. It's permission to see what others can't, to carry what others won't, to become who others never dared. There's a sacred pattern you'll find in the life of every person who's been truly transformed, truly called, truly set apart. And it starts with isolation, not by accident but by intention. You see, there's something about being alone that no crowd, no applause, no comfort zone can replicate. It is in solitude where the foundation of true greatness is quietly laid. Where the soul is stripped down, where ego dies, where clarity is born. It's where the divine does its deepest work, not in the presence of many, but in the absence of all. People think being alone is something to fear. They think it means rejection, that silence means abandonment, that if no one is walking with you, then maybe you're going the wrong way. But what if it's the opposite? What if being alone isn't a sign you're lost, but a signal you've been chosen? This is what many miss. When the divine marks you for something greater, the very first thing that happens is separation. Before blessing comes breaking. Before elevation comes isolation. Before the public moment comes a private process. Think about it, everything great begins in the dark. Seeds are planted in soil, deep beneath the surface. A child is formed in the womb, unseen by the world. Stars are born in the silence of space. Nothing extraordinary begins in the spotlight. It begins in stillness. That's why the gods, the divine forces that guide destiny, will often force you into places where it's just you and the quiet. Because in the quiet, everything surfaces. The truth about who you are. The pain you've ignored. The fears you've hidden. The pride you didn't see. It all comes up when there's no one else around to distract you from it. And that's where the work begins, because the divine doesn't want your performance. It wants your surrender. It doesn't want your followers, your plans, your network. It wants your heart. But to get to your heart, you have to be pulled away from everything that competes for it. You have to be emptied. Unplugged, undone, and it hurts. It feels like loss, like life is falling apart, like nothing is working. Friends stop calling, opportunities dry up. You pray and heaven feels silent. You show up and no one claps. You give your all and still feel invisible. That's not punishment. That's preparation. Because what's being built in you during isolation isn't visible yet. But it's real. It's deeper than surface success. It's the kind of strength that can't be shaken when storms hit. It's character, it's conviction, it's unshakable purpose, and that can't be downloaded. It has to be developed in the wilderness, not the stage. That's why solitude is sacred, because it becomes the place where vision is born, where your identity is separated from your achievements, where you stop asking for permission to be who you are and start walking in the authority of who you were created to be. See, when you're surrounded by people, their opinions become loud, but when you're alone, the voice inside becomes louder, the divine voice, the one that reminds you, you're more than what you do, you're more than what they said, you're more than what you've been through. That voice gets buried in noise, but in isolation, it's all you can hear. The gods don't want you to be alone to hurt you, they want you to be alone to heal you, to detox you from dependence on the world, to clean the lens through which you see yourself, to show you that your value doesn't come from being seen, it comes from being known by something greater. That's why, if you're in a season of isolation right now, don't fight it. Don't run from it. Don't curse it. Lean in. Let it do its work. Let it cut. Let it cleanse. Let it carve you into someone new. Because when it's over, and it will be, you won't be the same. You won't be looking for validation in the same places. You won't be moved by the same distractions. You won't need applause to feel anointed. You'll walk different, talk different, move different, because now you've been prepared, and preparation is personal. That's why it happens alone. You're not supposed to be accessible to everyone when you're in transformation. Caterpillars don't go to brunch while they're in the cocoon. They disappear. They let the process reshape them. And when they re-emerge, they fly. So don't fear isolation. Recognize it for what it really is, the womb of your next level. The pause before the power, the silence before the sound. You're not being buried. You're being planted. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. You're not alone because you're forgotten. You're alone because you're being forged. Let the silence speak. Let the stillness shape you. Let the aloneness prepare you for everything that's coming next. There are moments in life where it feels like everything starts to drift. People you once walked closely with suddenly fade. Opportunities that once made you feel alive now seem distant. Familiar voices become quiet. And the things that used to make sense just don't anymore. It's disorienting. It feels like loss. But what if it's not loss? What if it's alignment? What if the separation you're experiencing is not to break you, but to wake you? The divine doesn't reveal the deepest things in the loudest moments. Truth doesn't echo through crowded rooms, it's whispered in empty ones. And that's why sometimes you're pulled away. Not because you've done something wrong, but because what you need to hear next, what you need to see next, requires space. The truth is, clarity doesn't come when everything's loud. It comes when everything's still. You can't see the stars when the city lights are blinding. But in the middle of nowhere, far from the noise, the sky opens up and shows you what's always been there, you just couldn't see it. That's what divine separation does. It pulls you out so that vision can pull you forward. It removes what's been clouding your perception. And sometimes that's not just distractions, it's people. People who have been speaking into your life, but not from your destiny. People whose presence has been comforting but compromising your clarity. And sometimes that's you too, the version of yourself that was never meant to go where you're going. So what does the divine do? It separates, it isolates, it peels away every layer that's no longer aligned, not to leave you broken, but to make you ready. You see, revelation is not about information. It's about alignment. It's when the divine unlocks understanding that couldn't come any other way because you wouldn't have received it in the crowd. You would have dismissed it. You would have doubted it. You would have diluted it with everyone else's opinions. But in separation, there's nowhere else to look but up and inward. There's no distraction, no justification, no mask. It's just you and the truth, and in that place, things begin to make sense. You start to realize why that door had to close, why that friendship faded, why you didn't fit in there even when you tried, why the season changed even when your heart didn't want it to, because revelation doesn't come to the comfortable, it comes to the called. And those who are truly called will always experience a time where the divine cuts them off not to punish them, but to pour into them. It's the pruning before the blooming, the clarity before the calling. You can't carry what's next if you're still entangled with what's past. So the divine allows discomfort, distance, disconnection, and in the quiet that follows, your ears begin to open. Your heart begins to soften, and your spirit begins to receive what your mind never could have processed before. Because the greatest revelations in life don't come through textbooks or teachers. They come through tension, through the ache of becoming, through the sacred loneliness of being set apart. Look through every story of someone truly changed by divine encounter, you'll find the same pattern. First, they're removed, taken into deserts, into caves, into wilderness. Why? Because the divine didn't just want to change their path, it wanted to change their perspective. And you can't see clearly when you're surrounded by the familiar. You can't hear clearly when you're addicted to approval. So the divine shuts it all down, and in that silence, in that sacred space, revelation flows, new vision, new strength, new identity, a new name even, but most of all, a new awareness of who you really are and who you've been all along. So if you're walking through a season where everything feels like it's falling away, take heart. You're not losing your life, you're finding your light, you're not being abandoned, you're being awakened. And though it may hurt now, there is something on the other side of this solitude that will shift your entire future. Because when the divine wants to show you something real, it takes you where the fake can't follow. Revelation is expensive. It costs comfort. It costs company. It costs control. But it's worth it. Because what you see in separation will become the map for the rest of your mission. What you hear in the silence will become the sound of your purpose. And what you learn alone will one day bless countless others because you paid attention when no one else could hear. So don't rush the process. Don't fight the stillness. Let the distance do its work. Let the separation speak, because what it's unlocking in you can't be taught, only caught. And when it happens, when revelation finally hits, everything will make sense, not all at once, but in perfect timing. And you'll look back at this season not with regret, but with reverence, because now you'll know it wasn't loneliness, it was light breaking through. There's a subtle, sacred difference between being alone and being lonely. Most people don't know the difference, and that's where they miss the lesson. That's where they mistake the divine process for punishment, because being alone is a condition, but loneliness is an emotion. One is simply a state of being. The other is a state of perception. And when the divine calls you into aloneness, it's never to make you feel abandoned, it's to awaken something within you that could never surface in a crowd. Aloneness can be a gift, a sacred place, a spiritual strategy, but we often confuse it with loneliness because we've been trained to believe that if people aren't around us, if noise isn't constant, if attention isn't pouring in, something must be wrong. We've built our self-worth around company, noise, feedback, and validation. So when those things disappear, we start to panic. We assume we're being punished. We assume we've failed. But the truth is, sometimes the divine has to separate you from everything and everyone just to remind you of who you are without all the voices. Being alone is where the divine gets you back to the basics, where all the layers get stripped away, where you don't have to perform, impress, or explain. It's where you meet your real self, the one that doesn't rely on titles, followers, likes, or even applause. It's where the masks fall off. It's where the ego has nothing left to cling to, and in that vulnerable, raw space, something beautiful starts to grow. But loneliness, that's different. Loneliness is what happens when we resist the aloneness, when we fight the silence instead of listening to it. Loneliness creeps in when we define our value based on presence rather than purpose. It tells us we're forgotten, that no one sees us, that nothing we're doing matters. It tells us to go back, to settle, to compromise, just to feel connection again. But that kind of connection isn't healing, it's a bandage on a deeper wound. See, the divine doesn't isolate you to hurt you, it isolates you to heal you, to teach you that you are still enough without the crowd, that your calling is still valid, even when no one's clapping, that your voice still matters, even when no one's listening. You can only learn that kind of truth in aloneness. That's where confidence is built. That's where spiritual muscle forms. That's where self-worth gets rooted not in who's around you, but in who's within you. There's a reason why the most powerful moments in life often happen in solitude. It's in the quiet that you hear the clearest. It's in the stillness that you feel the deepest. And it's in that space between isolation and insight that transformation begins. You begin to see that aloneness isn't the absence of something, it's the presence of something greater. It's the divine pulling you aside and saying, "Come here. Let me speak to you without interruption. Let me remind you of the voice you carry. Let me strengthen what the world tried to tear down. Let me refill what life has emptied." But you can't receive that if you're rushing to fill the silence with noise, if you're trying to substitute presence with performance, if you're more focused on being seen than being shaped. Being alone is an invitation, a doorway into deeper identity, and not everyone gets the invitation. Only the ones who are being prepared for more. Only the ones who are trusted with silence, because silence isn't a void, it's a classroom. And those who learn to sit in it, to grow in it, to embrace it, come out of it with a power that doesn't shake when the storms come. You don't need to fear being alone. You need to fear being surrounded by people who keep you from ever becoming. You'll start to see that aloneness was never the problem. It was the birthplace of your awakening, the cocoon before the wings, the furnace before the gold, the wilderness before the voice. There will be days it feels heavy, moments it feels unfair, nights it feels unbearable, but if you stay long enough, if you wait in the tension, if you let the loneliness melt away and let aloneness become your teacher, you'll see. You'll feel it shift. You'll feel yourself getting stronger, clearer, freer. You'll stop begging for attention and start walking in authority. You'll stop performing and start embodying what's real. And when that happens, when you finally cross from loneliness into aloneness, you won't need to be rescued anymore. You won't need the noise. You'll be able to walk through crowds and still feel whole. You'll be able to lead without needing to be liked. You'll be able to love without losing yourself, because you've learned the secret. You were never truly alone. You are just being refined, rebuilt, remembered. So next time the world goes quiet, don't panic, lean in, listen. There's revelation in the silence, and there's strength in the space. You're not lonely. You're just alone, and that might be exactly where you're meant to be. There's a reason the most powerful things in life begin in the dark. Purpose, like life itself, starts in hidden places away from the spotlight, away from applause, away from the world's eyes. We live in a culture obsessed with being seen, being heard, being validated. But purpose doesn't come from the spotlight. It comes from silence. It grows in private long before it ever reveals itself in public. We often think that if something is important, it should be loud. That if we're doing something meaningful, everyone should know about it. But the divine doesn't work like that. When heaven is crafting something significant inside you, it doesn't advertise it. It protects it, it hides it, not to deprive you but to develop you, because what's born in secret is rooted in strength. What's formed in the dark won't be shaken by the light. Just like a baby is formed in the womb unseen, unheard, but undeniably alive, purpose is formed in hidden season. Those moments when you feel like nothing is moving, when your dreams feel buried, when no one is watching, that's where the real work is happening. That's where your character is shaped. That's where your voice is refined. That's where your identity is rebuilt, brick by brick, into something that can actually carry what's coming next. Because the truth is, public platforms can destroy what private foundations haven't prepared. That's why purpose demands privacy. You're not being hidden to be forgotten. You're being hidden to be fortified, to be made ready, to be stripped of everything that doesn't belong to the version of you that's going to change lives. We don't talk enough about how messy the beginning of purpose is, how lonely it can feel, how confusing it is to carry a calling you can't yet explain. There's no map for it, no spotlight on it. It's just you and the weight of something bigger than you growing inside your spirit. And while the world may not see it, heaven does. It watches you show up even when no one is clapping. It sees you stay faithful when there's no recognition. It notices when you choose growth over comfort, when you keep going despite the silence, when you trust the process even though it makes no sense. All of that happens in private. All of it matters. You can't microwave purpose. It has to marinate. You have to wrestle with it, sit with it, let it break you, mold you, humble you. You have to be willing to carry it when no one else understands. That's the cost of calling. It begins in places no one else can see. And maybe that's exactly why the divine insists on privacy. Because this world has made everything a performance. But calling isn't for performance, it's for impact. And impact doesn't come from noise. It comes from depth, from intimacy, from obedience in secret places, from learning to trust the divine even when it feels like you're walking blind. In private, you learn who you are when no one is watching. You learn how to pray when you have no one else to talk to. You learn how to lead when you feel like you have nothing left to give. You learn to discern what's real from what's simply loud. You learn that validation is dangerous when it becomes your fuel. You learn that what matters most is not being visible, it's being ready. Because when your purpose finally does emerge, when the time comes for what's inside of you to be revealed, it won't come with an announcement. It'll come with weight, with authority, with a presence that can only come from someone who's been through the process and didn't shortcut it. And people will look at you and say, "Where did you come from?" They won't understand the years you spent in silence, the nights you wanted to quit, the tears no one saw, the internal battles you fought while everyone else just saw your smile. But you'll know. You'll carry the evidence of the privacy. It'll be in your words, your walk, your wisdom. Not something you learned from a platform, but something you became in the process. So don't despise the privacy. Don't rush to be seen. Don't try to force the timing. There's something sacred happening in the shadows. Something divine is forming in the quiet. Something unshakable is growing where no one else can see. This is how purpose is born, not with noise, but with nurture, not in crowds, but in consecration. And if you're in that place right now, the hidden place, the quiet place, the unseen place, don't resist it. Embrace it. Lean into it. Let it form you, let it prepare you, because when purpose is born in privacy, it walks with power in public. And no matter how long it takes, when it finally shows up, it won't just be seen. It'll be felt. Before elevation, there is always isolation. This is a pattern not of punishment, but of preparation. A sacred rhythm where the divine pulls you away not to remove your worth, but to refine your weight, and it almost never feels good. In fact, it often feels like a setback, like rejection, like abandonment. But the truth is, you're not being dismissed, you're being distinguished. Elevation costs something. Not just talent, not just vision, but internal substance, a rootedness that can only be cultivated in isolation. Because when you're called to higher places, you can't take everything or everyone with you. Not every attachment can survive altitude. Not every mindset can make the climb. Some parts of you and some people around you can only exist at the ground level. So before the rise, there must be a release. This is why you'll often find yourself alone in the moments before something major shifts. It's not random. It's intentional. It's the sacred isolation. And in that space, everything starts to feel stripped. People don't check in like they used to. Opportunities slow down. The support you thought you needed disappears. But don't panic, that's the signal. That's the moment where heaven says, "Let me carry you now." You're being set apart to be set up. Because when you are elevated prematurely, when your platform rises faster than your maturity, the crash is inevitable. That's why the process is so slow. That's why the silence stretches. That's why you feel delayed, even when you're doing everything right. Because you're not just being built for visibility, you're being built for longevity. You see, elevation isn't just about status. It's about stewardship. And the divine can't elevate what hasn't been refined. You might have the gifts, but do you have the grace to carry them under pressure? You might have the voice, but can you still speak truth when it costs you comfort? You might have the dream, but can your heart handle the isolation that comes with walking alone in rooms full of people? That kind of strength, that kind of foundation is forged in private. It's built in the waiting room. It's tested in the silence, in the quiet where there's no applause, no confirmation, no spotlight. Just you and the sacred work. The uncomfortable, invisible, slow, building work of becoming someone who can hold the elevation when it finally comes. And here's the deeper truth. Elevation is not always external. Sometimes the divine isn't lifting you into new places physically, but internally. Lifting your mind into higher thought. Lifting your heart into deeper love. Lifting your spirit into greater wisdom. But even for that to happen, isolation is necessary, because we don't rise with distractions. We rise with focus. We rise when our ears are no longer filled with noise, when our dependence shifts from people to purpose, when we stop searching outward and start listening inward. In isolation, your identity becomes clearer. You no longer define yourself by who's with you or what's happening around you. You begin to realize that the elevation doesn't start when the world sees you. It starts when you see yourself differently. When you realize that everything you're becoming is already inside of you. It just needed silence to surface. The sacred isolation is not a detour. It's the direct route to the version of you that can't be shaken. It teaches you how to walk without needing permission, how to create without needing applause, how to move without needing validation. And when you step into elevation from that place, you won't just rise, you'll remain. That's what most people miss. They chase the rise without respecting the root. But anything that rises without a foundation is bound to fall. So, if it feels like the divine is holding you back, keeping you small, hiding you, thank God. Thank Him that He cares too much about you to let you self-destruct with exposure you're not ready for. You're not behind. You're not forgotten. You're being forged. And when it's time, when the work in the dark is done, elevation won't even look the way you expected. It won't be about status. It'll be about substance. You'll be elevated in wisdom, elevated in peace, elevated in clarity, in confidence, in courage. And you'll realize that the season of isolation wasn't meant to break you. It was the very thing that built you. You won't need to explain your rise. It will be evident because people will see the difference. They'll hear it in your voice. They'll feel it in your presence. They'll notice a depth that can't be faked, a kind of power that only comes from someone who's walked through the fire of aloneness and came out with gold. So embrace the sacred isolation. It's not the end of your story, it's the quiet before the reveal, the stillness before the shift. And when the elevation finally comes, not if, but when you'll rise not with desperation, but with divine design. Because the ones who are called to high places always go through low places first. And the ones who last at the top are the ones who let the silence teach them what the noise never could. There is a kind of clarity that only comes when the noise dies down. A voice that isn't loud but unmistakable one you don't truly hear until everything else fades. That's why isolation is not just a tool for refinement or a space for healing. It is, perhaps most importantly, the place where the divine speaks the loudest. Not because the voice is any louder in those moments, but because your distractions are finally quieter. We live in a world that never stops talking. Opinions, advice, pressure, expectations, validation, it's a constant stream. The world screams while the divine whispers, and in the chaos of the crowd, that whisper is easily drowned out. You can go days, months, even years thinking you're walking the right path, simply because it's noisy enough to feel like motion. But then the noise stops, the people fall away, the platforms go silent, and suddenly there's nothing left but the voice you forgot how to hear. That's the gift of isolation. It brings you back to divine frequency. It's in that stillness where real direction is given. Not the kind that gets you to your next milestone, but the kind that guides your soul back to alignment. When you're alone, You stop performing. You stop trying to be what people want. You stop filtering your thoughts through public opinion. And in that raw, unfiltered space, something holy happens. You start to remember not who the world told you to be, but who you already are. The divine doesn't compete for attention. It waits for your surrender. It waits for your willingness to sit in the silence long enough to really listen, to strip away the external layers until all that's left is the bare truth, and that truth, it's always been there. It just got buried under noise, under pressure, under expectations you were never meant to carry. So when the isolation comes, and it will come, see it not as a punishment, but as an invitation to realign, to recenter, to reconnect with a voice that knows you better than anyone else ever could. Some of the most powerful revelations don't come in a church, or through a mentor, or even through success. They come in your quiet room at night, when you feel like no one understands you. They come in your car, parked in silence after a breakdown. They come in your kitchen, mid-laundry, mid-prayer, nothing when the silence is so loud you think you'll break. But that's when the divine speaks, not in grand announcements, not in fireworks, but in subtle truths that pierce deeper than anything else ever could. You're still chosen, you're still enough, you're still mine, and you only hear that when the noise stops. That's why the most spiritually grounded people aren't always the loudest. They're the ones who have learned to sit in solitude without losing themselves. The ones who have let the silence teach them. The ones who know that connection with the divine is not based on volume, but on presence. On stillness, on trust, you might feel like you're in a season right now where nothing is moving. No doors are opening. No one is calling. The world feels far, and heaven feels silent. But listen closely, it's not silent. It's sacred, something is being said, something is being shown, but it's subtle, it's soft. You won't catch it if you're still looking for fireworks. You won't feel it if you're still waiting for the crowd. Isolation strips you of the external, so that the internal can finally come alive. And the more you learn to hear that still small voice, the more confident, grounded, and peaceful you become. Because once you've heard truth in the quiet, you stop chasing validation in the noise. Once you've encountered real presence in solitude, you'll never again confuse busyness for purpose. You'll know the difference between activity and alignment, and that changes everything. The world teaches us to fear isolation, to fill every quiet moment with noise. But the divine uses it as the greatest setup for intimacy. That's why some of your greatest revelations will never be shared with a crowd. They were meant for you alone, carved into your heart in the silence. And no one can take them away, so don't resist the quiet. Don't rush out of the isolation. Don't look for the nearest distraction. Sit in it, lean into it, because somewhere in that stillness, the divine is speaking something just for you. A direction, a healing, a reminder, maybe even a release. And the clarity it brings will outlast every loud moment that tried to steal your focus. You don't need the crowd to hear your calling. You need the quiet. And when you learn to hear the divine clearly in isolation, you'll walk differently, you'll choose differently, you'll love more deeply, speak more wisely, and live more fully because you're not guided by fear, noise, or pressure anymore. You're guided by a whisper that never wavers, a voice that never lies, one that sounds clearest when everything else goes silent. So let it get quiet. Let it get still. That's where the shift begins. That's where clarity is born. That's where you hear the divine like never before. there is a kind of truth that only emerges when you're alone. Not the kind that people reflect back to you, not the identity shaped by roles you play in others' lives, but the raw, unfiltered, unmasked version of you. Aloneness is not just silence from the world, it's confrontation with the self. And while community can offer comfort, encouragement, and even accountability, it also allows you to hide. It allows you to disappear behind smiles, behind service, behind identity roles that keep you safe from ever facing what's truly going on inside. But when the crowd fades, when the phone stops ringing, when no one is asking for your attention or your energy, you're left with something terrifying and holy, the truth. Aloneness strips away the performance. It silences the applause. It removes the comparisons, the expectations, and the mirrors of other people's opinions. Suddenly, you're left with only one thing, your own reflection. Not the one you post, not the one you pretend to be, but the honest, aching, unfiltered version of you that you've managed to keep buried beneath activity and affirmation. And this is why aloneness is sacred, because it invites you into a kind of self-awareness that cannot be accessed in the noise. You start to see what you've been running from, the fear that's been masked by ambition, the insecurity that's been hidden under humor, the pain you've called just being strong. You begin to feel the weight of what you've ignored. You notice the beliefs you've adopted without questioning. You realize how often you've compromised who you are to be accepted. Community has a beautiful way of giving us belonging, but sometimes it makes it too easy to lose ourselves. When people expect you to be the strong one, you keep being strong even when you're breaking. When they see you as the successful one, you keep performing even when you feel empty. When they label you the spiritual one, you keep saying the right things even when your soul is in drought. But when you're alone, you can't play those roles anymore. There's no one to impress, no script to follow, no validation to chase. It's just you and everything you've been avoiding, and that's where the work begins. You start to ask the hard questions. Who am I without the attention, without the applause, without the titles, the likes, the roles I've used to define myself? What do I believe when no one is influencing my voice? What do I want when I stop trying to be who everyone else needs me to be? And yes, it's uncomfortable. Aloneness has a way of revealing not only what's broken, but also what's beautiful. You begin to discover parts of you that were never nurtured because you were too busy fitting in. Dreams you silenced, desires you ignored, boundaries you compromised. You see clearly the patterns, the cycles, the truths you didn't want to face. But here's the grace. What's revealed can finally be healed, because you can't fix what you won't face. You can't grow past what you pretend isn't there. And you certainly can't fulfill a calling if you don't even know who you are outside of what people need from you. That's why sometimes the divine will pull you away from the crowd, not to punish you, but to show you, to hold up a mirror you can't avoid, to let you feel the ache of disconnection so deeply that it births something new, not just a better version of you, but a truer one. It's in that space where forgiveness happens, real forgiveness not just for others, but for yourself, for the choices you made out of survival, for the times you betrayed your own voice just to keep the peace, for the years you spent trying to earn love when you were already worthy of it. Aloneness doesn't just confront, it awakens. It awakens your discernment, your inner compass, your forgotten identity. It teaches you to listen again, not to the loudest voice in the room, but to the quiet knowing inside you that's been whispering all along. It gives you the chance to rewrite your story, not for anyone else's consumption, but for your own healing. And when you come out of that season, you walk differently. You love without losing yourself. You give without draining yourself. You show up without shrinking, because you've met yourself in the dark. You face the parts of you that used to scare you, and now no amount of applause or absence can define you. So if you find yourself alone right now, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, don't despise it. Don't rush to fill the silence. Let it do its work. Let it strip. Let it sift. Let it show. Let it walk you back to the you that existed before the world taught you who to be. Because when the divine calls you into aloneness, it's not abandonment, it's alignment. It's an invitation to see yourself, to love yourself, and to heal in places that community never even touched. Not because community is bad, but because some healing is too deep to be done in the presence of others. It needs solitude. It needs surrender. It needs you, stripped of every mask, standing in the raw light of your truth. So if you're feeling isolated right now, if you're tired of being unseen, unheard, misunderstood, don't curse the silence. Thank it, because you are not being left behind. You're being called ahead. And when the time comes, the same crowd that questioned your silence will witness your sound. Until then, walk alone. Grow in secret. Let the gods do their work in the dark, because when you finally rise, it won't be for applause. It'll be because purpose woke up inside of you, and the silence made space for it to speak.